Oh, hi, fellow pet professional. Writing training plans doesn't have to take forever. And it doesn't have to be different every single time. If you're a behavior and training professional who's tired of reinventing the wheel, our 15-minute training plan challenge is for you. In this hands-on challenge, I'll walk you through how to create a flexible template that works for you and your client, so you can write effective, individualized training plans in just 15 minutes. Better yet, you're going to walk away with your own template at the end of our time together. No more blank screens, no more starting from scratch, just a clear, repeatable process you can use with every client. Join the challenge now at petharmonytraining.com/training plan. That's petharmonytraining.com/training plan. You don't need more hours in the day. You need a better system, and this is it.
And I do want to add that sometimes free contact isn't ever our goal. It's okay for some dogs to be really, really not cool with strangers. And our goal for them is just to be able to ignore strangers when they're out in the world or seek safety, go to their relaxation station or their do a flight queue or whatever when people come into the house. And our goal is never free contact for those people. Dogs don't have to be BFFs with every human. They just don't. They don't have to be BFFs with every dog. Nobody has to be BFFs with everybody. That's not a realistic goal for humans. That should not be a goal for non-humans.
Welcome to Enrichment for the Real World, the podcast devoted to improving the quality of life of pets and their people through enrichment. We are your hosts, Allie Bender.
And I'm Emily Strong.
And we are here to challenge and expand your view of what enrichment is, what enrichment can be, and what enrichment can do for you and the animals in your lives. Let's get started. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Enrichment for the Real World. And I want to thank you for rating, reviewing, and subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. In this episode, you're going to hear Emily and I talk about why we love kiddos who want to eat your face, when a 10-foot stone wall does not count as protected contact, one of Emily's favorite cases, which was a household with 6 kids and a dog who had a bite first, ask questions later philosophy, and protected contact is not an excuse to put animals in high-stress situations. Content warning, there's a very brief mention of behavioral euthanasia and a story that alludes to a history of animal abuse in this episode. And as a disclaimer, the information in this episode is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute professional behavior advice. Every animal is unique, and what works for one may not work for another. If your pet struggles with aggression, we strongly recommend working with a qualified behavior professional who can provide individualized support. And if you're a professional who does not currently work with aggression, don't do so after just listening to this episode. Get a mentor. Do it right. All right, let's get into it. So today, y'all, we are talking about training an aggressive dog safely, the ins and outs of protected contact. And I'm really excited about this topic, which I guess sounds weird, but I honestly love working with the kiddos that want to eat my face. Like, they're my favorite kiddos to work with. Not humans. Humans that want to eat my face are not my favorite. Non-human animals who want to eat my face are my favorite. I have to clarify that. So one of the reasons that I'm so excited to talk about this topic today is that when we're talking about training aggressive dogs safely, I've seen a lot of recommendations out there, and frankly, I see a lot of recommendations that I really disagree with, whether it's because it can be actually harmful for the human, it's not safe for the human, or usually it's because it doesn't provide the animal that we're working with agency, security, all of the things that we're looking for. We're putting the animal into unsafe and unenriching situations. So I'm excited to talk about protected contact, which is my favorite way of training an aggressive dog safely. And let's actually, for just a moment, talk about the word aggressive, because neither Emily nor I actually like the word aggressive, and also that is what the general population is using. And so we are meeting our human learners where they are at with that term. So let's define for a moment what we mean by that. We're talking about animals who choose fight over flight in periods of high stress. And now I want to be very, very clear. These kiddos who are choosing fight over flight, it does not mean they are bad. It does not mean they are mean. It just means they have learned a particular set of behaviors works better for them than another particular set of behaviors at achieving their desired result. A lot of times we see this is coming because of stress, fear, anxiety, and I want to, again, be super clear that this is not an intrinsic value or moral judgment of an animal.
Yeah, I share so much of your feelings about this, and my start in science-based behavior was with predominantly animals who had big struggles, and typically those struggles included aggression. And then you and I met at a sanctuary where the overwhelming majority of the population would choose fight over flight or freeze in periods of high stress. And so we worked with a lot of animals that had been labeled as aggressive. Like you, I share a soft spot for the kiddos who are labeled as aggressive. And I think that's because the outcomes are usually less awesome for them. A lot of people just sort of have a stance that if an animal is fearful or freezing, that like they can just love the animal and be patient with them and gentle with them, and the animal will come around. And whether or not that's an accurate statement, that's kind of a common belief about how you respond to those behaviors. But a lot of people believe for the aggressive kiddos that the best response is responding with aggression, confinement, suppression, restriction. And today is not the day to talk about behavioral euthanasia, but we all know that those kids are at the highest risk for behavioral euthanasia. And we don't necessarily disagree with those decisions in every case, but there's a lot of nuance that gets missed in the public conversation about the aggressive kiddos. So I think it is really important to talk about the role of protected contact in helping these our our aggressive friends to have more freedom and a more enriching life while keeping everybody safe and establishing clear lines of communication and a good relationship and teaching them skills to help them better navigate their world.
So we've defined what we mean by an aggressive animal. Let's now define what we mean by protected contact, and then we'll get into types of protected contact and all of the fun things. I am just realizing that I actually really love this like I'm so excited about protected contact. Who knew that I love it so much?
I mean, I think the reason that you're so excited about it is because we use it all the friggin' time, but like we've never talked about it before, and I don't know why it took us. I mean, our book has been out for 6 years, 5.5 years at this point, and we were like, you know what, we should talk about enrichment in the context of aggression. It's like our bread and butter, and yet it took us this long to figure out that we can actually talk about it.
Brains are wild is all we can say. So when we're talking about protected contact, we are talking about there is some form of barrier between the animal and the human.
Yeah, so there's actually several layers of protection. There's different types of using barriers for working with animals. And the one that we mostly do is no barriers at all, and that's called free contact. So if you're just living in your house with your pet, they can climb up on your lap and lick your face whenever they want. Free contact. There's no restriction between the human and the non-human. The next phase up is the second most common thing that we experience in sharing our lives with non-human animals, and that is partial or semi-protected contact. So that's where there's some measure of protection, there's some level of a barrier, but they can still contact us on some level or some way. So muzzles are an example of partial or semi-protected contact. Leashes are partial or semi-protected contact. So those are really common types of barriers that we use. The animal can still reach you, they can still touch you, they can still jump on you, but they've got a muzzle on. Or the animal can reach you within a certain radius. If you're within the radius of their leash, they have free contact. But when you're outside that radius, they can't actually come into contact with you. So those are examples of partial or semi-protected contact. And then there's the stuff that we're going to talk about today, the stuff that Allie and I are really excited about because we use it a lot, but we don't talk about it a lot. And that is protected contact. And that's where there is a full barrier between the human and the non-human. Now, there are other even more intense types of barriers that we can work through, but we just don't see those very often in the companion animal community. Usually those are used in zoos or like wildlife situations. So we're not going to talk about those in this episode. But here's the thing that people really need to understand, because people get this wrong a lot. Whether it's protected contact or partial protected contact depends entirely on the individual and the environment. You can't say that this X pen is intrinsically protected contact, because if you're working with a dog who can climb or jump over it or bulldoze through it, break it down, then obviously it is not a full barrier. In that case, for that animal in that context, that X pen is partial protected contact or semi-protected contact. You can't even say that a fence is full protected contact if you have dogs who can climb or jump fences. I had a client whose dog would climb the tree, walk out onto the branch, and jump over the fence. And she didn't understand how her dog could scale. They had a 10-foot like stone wall fence, and she was like, I don't know how my dog is getting out. So we used a nanny cam, and the dog was climbing the tree, walking out on the branch, and jumping off. So a 10-foot stone wall still was only partial protected contact for that dog. There was some measure of protection between that dog and anybody who was outside of the yard. But if the dog was motivated enough, the dog could clear that barrier. So it was only a partial protection. It was only semi-protected contact. So we have to be very careful not to state that the object itself is protected contact. We're looking at the situation. We're looking at the outcomes. Maybe y'all have heard that before. I don't know where you would have heard that. It's almost like we talk about how enrichment is not the objects or the activities, but the outcomes. Same thing with whether we're talking about free contact, partial contact, or protected contact. It's about the individual and the situation in and of itself. So now that we have talked about the different layers of protection, the different layers of barriers or contact that we can have between humans and non-humans in the companion animal community, let's talk about why we love protected contact so much.
Such a good point, Emily, that once again, it's about outcomes, and we need to take a descriptive instead of a prescriptive approach to everything in life. Just everything, not just this. So the reason we love it so much is that protected contact usually gives animals the most freedom in a particular situation while still creating a safe environment for the humans involved. And the other really nice thing about it is that it can prevent clients from falling back on muscle memory that kind of gets in their way.
So for this episode, we're going to be using one of my favorite clients as our kind of example, our story to explain what this looks like. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Archie. Archie was adopted by this really lovely family. They're just like superheroes. Like I don't know how else to explain them. They had 6 children and 2 businesses. And they still just like had this lovely, warm, welcoming home. They had people over all the time. They had lots of cousins and lots of friends, and employees would come to their house. Their house was like the hangout spot. It was really great. And they decided to adopt this dog, Archie, who the shelter told them that Archie was a really, really difficult dog. And he had been there for a long time because he legitimately was not safe. We can have so many podcast episodes on the decisions that shelters make to adopt out animals. but in this case, this family had a large house with a lot of property that backed up to a mountain that was unfenced. They had the resources to actually meet Archie's needs. So Archie really, really lucked out. He won the lottery, and this family was so committed to him and committed to keeping him safe. But what they learned very, very early on is that Archie had a bite first, ask questions later policy, and he was terrified of their 10-year-old son. We all think that their son must have looked like somebody who had done things to Archie, who had hurt Archie, because Archie did not respond that way to anybody else. It was specifically the 10-year-old that from the moment he met him, Archie showed quite a bit of terror. And then their 4-year-old was obviously not safe around Archie because she was 4. By definition, she's not safe around a dog who has a bite first, ask questions later policy. So they had worked with another trainer first. And to that trainer's credit, they were working very hard to make sure that everybody stayed safe. But the outcome of that was Archie led an incredibly restricted life. And so we wanted to give him a little more space and a little more freedom. So one of the things that they did for him was we did a couple things. First of all, we had an X pen that went into a corner of the living room so we can make the space as big as possible, because the X pen was 2 of the walls and the actual walls of the living room were the other 2 walls. So it made a pretty big space for him. And Archie was a dog for whom an X pen was actually protected contact. He couldn't jump over. I think he may have had some skeletal issues because he just physically couldn't jump that high, and he did not try to climb the X pen. So for his hanging out in the living room, we did a really big X pen that was like an enrichment area. But that was not where he lived. That was just where he would go when there was family time, where they could spend time with him when everybody was gathered in the living room. What they did for his actual house was they had an ATV garage behind their actual car garage. And that was fenced separately. I can't remember if they built the fence for Archie or the fence was already there, because the ATVs were to go out onto the mountains behind their house. So they were able to set up the garage as Archie's living room, and they had a sofa for him, and they had all kinds of comfortable things. They had everything to meet his needs. He had a whole activity center down there, and then the yard itself they made enriching for him. And when the weather was agreeable, they would leave the garage door open so that he could choose between the indoor space and the outdoor space. And he could be outside when the kids were outside, but there was still that fence between him and the kids. So it was a perfect, like I said, Archie won the lottery. Most people could not do what they were able to do for this dog. But it was a perfect example of a protected contact setup, both in his main living area and in his playroom in the living room, where he could be with the family without being in direct contact with them. So that's the place to start with Archie's story, is how they were able to set up their environment so that they could work with Archie through protected contact and still meet his needs and give him an enormous amount of freedom. So with that as our sort of foundation for what protected contact can look like, let's talk about how we do protected contact. How do we implement this in a client case? So first of all, we need to assess which level of contact is appropriate for the animal in whatever contexts we're looking at for them. And we need to assess what type of barrier is going to make the most sense. And again, we're going to take a descriptive approach to this. So we're going to take multiple things into consideration when we make this decision. So we're going to look at the pet. How much of a barrier do we actually need between the pet and the client? Is this a semi-protected situation or a full, I almost said full contact. It's not, that's football. Or a protected contact situation? Is this an animal who needs protected contact all of the time, most of the time, only in very specific situations? So what does the pet need? And also, what are the pet's needs in general? Like, what are we doing? What does this animal's enrichment plan look like? What do we need to give the animal access to be able to do? And how does that influence what level of contact we're going to give this animal? We also need to look at the client. What are the client's skill sets? What is their lifestyle? How many people are in the home? What are the ages of the people in the home? How much fear do the people have towards the dog? Are they too scared? Are they not scared enough? Do they ignore the dog? Are they good at reading body language? We need to really pay attention to the client's reality because yes, ideally we would be able to teach our clients how to build a relationship, how to read body language, how to make good decisions. All of that is our goal for someday. And also, that is not their current reality. So we're not going to plan for someday. We're going to plan for today. Next, we need to look at the environment. What is going to make the most sense for the environment? So for Archie, because they had a living room that had space that could facilitate that X pen, that made the most sense. That would not make the most sense in my living room. I don't have the space for that in my living room. And also, my living room isn't shaped that way. So I couldn't do an X pen square enrichment space in the living room in my house the way that they did for Archie because that does not make sense in my environment. I also don't have an ATV garage with its own fence that's cordoned off from the rest of the backyard. Couldn't do that either. So we would have to look at what the environment looks like to figure out how to set up protected contact in a way that fits within the means of the client and fits within the actual physical space and is actually functional for protecting the humans and non-humans from each other. And then we actually need to look at the context too. Is this an animal who always needs protected contact, who needs it sometimes, who needs it only in very specific situations? Is this a dog who only needs to be in protected contact when people come to the house? Or is this a dog who lives with a 4-year-old and has a bite first, ask questions later policy? And this dog always needs to be in protected contact from that 4-year-old. That 4-year-old can never come into free contact with this dog until she's significantly older and the dog has more skills and they both have no until they both have more skills, I should say, and they have a really solid relationship. But until that time, they need to be always in protected contact. We're never going to have them free contact. And then we also need to look at our goals. What are we trying to do for this animal? Are we just is the family happy just living with a dog in protected contact forever? Are they fine with that? Or are we actually aiming for integration? Is that realistic? Is that what they want? So we need to know what we're actually trying to do. Is this a situation where the dog is fine with the family, but they're not fine with visitors? Is this a situation where the dog is fine with most visitors, but there are some people in particular that the dog has it out for? Like, we need to really figure out what our goal is, and as part of the process of deciding what type of semi-protected or protected contact we're going to be using.
Okay, so after we have assessed what makes the most sense, because failing to plan is planning to fail, then we can go into antecedent arrangement. One of the things that I hear so frequently when I talk to clients about protected contact, especially in terms of when visitors come over, when we're working with a kiddo who has stranger danger, one of the things they say is like, yeah, my dog's not going to be okay with that. So what do I mean by that? For example, a lot of times when I'm working with a client on a case with stranger danger, I'll ask, have you tried putting the dog in another room when a visitor comes, a bedroom or something like that? And they're like, we have, but they bark the whole time. They scratch the door. They whine, all of this. The dog is clearly not happy to be in that space. When I dive it a little bit deeper, what we learn is that the dog hasn't ever been taught how to be in that space alone, or that space can be really awesome at all. They're just put into a bedroom and the door is closed and the dog's like, excuse me, what the heck? This is silly. So one of the things that we need to do is make the space enriching. How can we make this the best space in the entire world where It's like when you tell a teenage human to go to their room and they're like, yeah, that place is obviously better than here. And they're like thrilled with it. We want them to absolutely love being in that space and to love being in that space alone. Now, this does get tricky when we have kiddos who have both separation anxiety and stranger danger, which is a super fun combo. We're not talking about those kids today. That's more complicated than what we're going to get into at this moment. We want to teach them this space is awesome. It has awesome things. You're going to love it. And teach them to love it. Part of that, in addition to teaching the animal that space is awesome, and by space, I'm using bedroom as an example because it's just an easy bedroom that I talk to clients about a lot, but that can be any behind a baby gate, behind a barrier. Like, we get the same complaints from people saying that my dog is not okay behind a baby gate, and the answer is still the same. In addition to giving the animal skills, we have said this a million times, we will say this a million times more. The humans are also learners, and we need to give our human learner skills. So we need to make sure that the humans who are doing the setup have the tools to maintain that separation. That can be as simple as batch making a bunch of stuffed Kongs so that you don't have to be scrambling to make a stuffed Kong, answer the door, put your dog away. Like, it can be as simple as that. We had an episode about batching a while ago. Ellen will put it in the show notes because she will know where to find it. It will be in the show notes, y'all. So it can be as simple as batch making that. It can also be as simple as having your visitors text you when they're 10 minutes away so that you can put your dog away ahead of time. I can't tell you how many clients have told me that in and of itself is a complete game changer for them. Oh my gosh, it's so much easier to put my dog behind a barrier before there's somebody at my door. And I'm like, yes, antecedent arrangement for the win.
When I was working with a neurospicy client, and they were trying really hard to do this well. But sequencing is hard for us with some different neurotypes. Some neurotypes, we really struggle with sequencing. And so I was very sympathetic to their struggle. And I was like, okay, so here's the order in which, and I wish I could remember the order in which they were trying to do it, but this was years ago and I have a terrible memory. But whatever they were doing, the order of events was what was making it hard. And so we had to be like, okay, here's the order of events that we should try to see if it makes it easier. And so I just had them do it in the order. And lo and behold, the dog was totally fine with it when we did it in the correct order. And so I had to tag teach that sequence. We had to practice it without the dog until they could get fluent at doing the sequence correctly. And then we tried it with the dog. And then they had friends come over and they did the sequence and they texted me and they're like, it was amazing. It was so easy. The dog was like really happy and all that. And I was like, my heart was glowing because I was like, you were trying to do the right thing and you were struggling and you thought that this was not a good approach for you when really it was just the sequence of events that wasn't working for you. And so we just had to help you change the sequence and practice the sequence to be able to have success with this strategy. So I think that happens a lot is people try protected contact and they're like, well, it doesn't work. And it's like, well, the way that you tried it didn't work. Let's try it differently. Let's do something different and see what happens. So next, after the clients have the skills and the tools to maintain good separation and we are doing protected contact well, the next thing we need to do is create opportunities for safe interaction across the barrier because there's not a whole lot of point in the protected contact if they're going to be like violating the barrier, right? So for example, with the Archie, when we first set up the X pen, our little 4-year-old friend was still trying to like touch Archie, sticking her little fingers through the X pen. It's like, well, that's not it. So we had to create visual barriers on parts of the X pen so that she couldn't physically stick her fingers through. And then in other parts, we had to create space where he could see. It worked better for both of them because Archie did better when there was a space where he could hide from the people in the household or not have to see them. But then he had the option to look if he wanted to. But then also it just worked better for the 4-year-old because she couldn't stick her fingers in the X pen holes trying to touch Archie. And then we also worked on using some kind of family pause techniques for teaching her to keep her fingers out of the X pen. So it was also skill building, but we definitely had to use that barrier as part of our solution so that she couldn't make any mistakes that would be really detrimental to both her and Archie. So we have to teach people how to work through a barrier with a dog, because a lot of people don't know. We're so used to being able to touch them and physically manipulate them and get them to do what we want. So we're so used to being able to do that that when you get a dog on the other side of a barrier, a lot of people are flummoxed as to how they're going to interact safely with their dog. But one of the simplest things that you can do is find it, because we used to do this all the time at the sanctuary when we had dogs that were so over the top reactive that we couldn't do any training with them to start. The way we would start was just we'd walk by the fence, toss some treats over the fence. The first few times the dog would be so mad that they wouldn't notice the food. But then after we'd pass, they'd be like, "Oh, how'd this chicken get here?" And then after a few repetitions, they would eventually be like, "Oh, the chicken's coming from you. Oh, you throw chicken? Okay, well, maybe now, like, we could talk. Like, what you got for me?" And obviously, that is suboptimal. If an animal does not have an ability to escape, it's still technically flooding. But in those situations where we didn't have any other choices, that's how we started out. And we still eventually got the dogs to where we needed them to go. So we weren't flooding them anymore. They were willing participants. But the point of that story is that if you have nothing else to do with this dog and your clients have no other skills and you are going to have to teach them those skills, the very, very easiest thing that you can have them do is just walk by the barrier and chuck treats over the barrier. That's an example of a safe interaction across the barrier. So for the 10-year-old that Archie was so afraid of and the 4-year-old, we would just have them toss treats over. We practiced reading body language, moving closer or farther away based on Archie's body language. Then we started doing 101 things to do with a box to get them to build a relationship between Archie and the kids. And the way that I did that was by teaching the 16-year-old 101 things to do with a box. And then the 16-year-old taught the 10-year-old under my supervision. So I didn't want Archie to have to learn a new game with the person that he was terrified of. So that's why I started with the 16-year-old, because he had a good relationship with the 16-year-old. So we started with the 16-year-old so Archie could learn the rules of the game. And then I had the 16-year-old teach the 10-year-old so Archie could be a part of this group where they're collaboratively working together. And then the 10-year-old taught the 4-year-old. So that was a thing that we did to get Archie's brain going, to build a relationship, to establish communication, to teach training mechanics to the kids at the level at which they needed them. Like, they don't need to be rock star trainers, but they do need to be clear communicators. And it was beautiful. It worked beautifully. And we did target training with the adult children and the 2 parents, so that Archie could be safely moved in and out, and so that they could do start some cooperative care stuff with him. We would have them close the garage door, go into Archie's yard, set up the nosework field, leave the yard, open the garage door and let him out, and then they would just give him all of the cues that we would normally do in a nosework field from outside the fence. So he got to play the nosework game. Our aim, throwing treats into the hides where he found the original treats, was not great, but you know what? He still learned the game and everybody still had fun. So we did a lot of things through barriers with Archie so that we could reach all of their goals. And it was beautiful. It did take some skill building. We had to teach skills, but we got there and it was awesome.
Once we have opportunities for safe interaction across that protected contact barrier, the next step is to stair step down to partial contact before going free contact. This is a mistake that we see a lot of people make. Humans in general just try to go too fast when we're training stuff. We get really excited and we try to push those little boundaries. This is not a place to do that. Don't push boundaries when you're working with an aggressive dog or cat or bird or anybody. Just don't do it. So what does this look like? Partial contact, and I'm going to go back to my example of a stranger danger dog that we have in a bedroom. So the next step could be we have a baby gate that maybe the dog could or could not get through the baby gate. We don't necessarily know if it's protected contact or just partial contact, but we could have the animal interacting through a baby gate instead of being completely behind a separate door. A lot of times I end up doing partial contact with these kind of really flimsy barriers where it's like, yeah, they could absolutely push through. And also, they have enough skills at this point, like what Emily was just talking about, skill building first. They have enough skills at this point that we really don't think that's going to happen. We also see partial contact in the form of now they're wearing a muzzle. Again, they have the skill to enjoy wearing their muzzle for a period of time, but they're now wearing a muzzle and are not behind a baby gate or a barrier, or perhaps they're on leash and they might be able to move closer to that person on their leash. So we have a lot of options between completely no contact, full separation, and just like free for all. There are a lot of options in between, and we need to train for those options in between as well. So that's our next step, is we're going to go down to partial contact, and we're not going to move to free contact until all parties involved. That might just be the dog and one human, but usually it's a lot more than just one dog and the human. Even in a stranger danger case, it's usually like the pet parents and the dog walker. You know, there's a lot of people involved in this potentially, until all parties are fully skilled and completely calm, confident, and comfortable around each other. I tell my clients that we are going to move at the pace of the least comfortable individual. In the beginning, that's usually the non-human animal, and at some point in time, it's going to be a human. And so we are going to move at the pace of the least comfortable individual, and we are not doing free contact until every single individual, regardless of species, feels okay with that.
And I do want to add that sometimes free contact isn't ever our goal. It's okay for some dogs to be really, really not cool with strangers. And our goal for them is just to be able to ignore strangers when they're out in the world, or seek safety, go to their relaxation station, or their do a flight queue or whatever when people come into the house. And our goal is never free contact for those people. Dogs don't have to be BFFs with every human. They just don't. They don't have to be BFFs with every dog. Nobody has to be BFFs with everybody. That's not a realistic goal for humans. That should not be a goal for non-humans. So when we're talking about that, we specifically mean when free contact is the goal, that's how we do it. All right, let's talk about some tips and common mistakes that people make when they're doing this, because one of the things that we talked about is if we're going to have this episode, we need to have disclaimers up the wazoo, because we don't want people listening to a podcast and then going out and trying things and being like, well, Pet Harmony told me to do it and I got my face eaten off. And it's like, well, we didn't tell you to do it. We told you how we do it. But so things to be careful of: double and triple check safety. If you think you closed the gate, if you think you latched it, if you think you have the muzzle on correctly, try it again and then test it again and then check it one more time. Just make extra sure that everybody is safe before proceeding. Another thing is, like we talked about earlier, unless you absolutely have to and you have no other choice, don't put the dog in a high stress situation and expect the barrier to keep everybody safe. That is flooding. We mentioned that earlier at the sanctuary. There are some times that we had no choice but to flood those dogs because of the limitations of the size of their yard and how many dogs there were and how stressed the dogs were. And we had very few avenues for doing a least intrusive, less aversive method. But it is flooding. Be aware that if you are causing extreme stress to an animal behind a barrier, you are still flooding them. So the barrier should be a safety net, not the only thing that's keeping the dog from trying to attack.
In addition to that, using bite gloves to handle an animal who doesn't want to be handled is also flooding. Just FYI.
Yeah, so all of that includes, like, partial protected contact doesn't just include muzzles and leashes. It also includes things like shin guards, arm guards, gloves. We have used all of that equipment when we've worked with some of the dogs in our care in the past, when we have deemed those tools of protection to be prudence, and also we don't use them as an excuse to flood a dog, because like we're not trying to protect ourselves from being bitten. We're trying to protect the dog from feeling like they need to bite, and that equipment is just there as a backup plan. So all of these things, all of the partial and full protected contact stuff that we're talking about is just a safety net. It should not be the only thing that's keeping the dog from trying to attack you. So if a dog can't handle the situation, we need to do complete separation, not protected contact, and work backwards from there. And we don't have the ability to go into more depth in what that means in this episode. That's why we do this for a living, because it takes a lot of knowledge and experience to be able to navigate those situations. And like Allie said earlier, we all humans have a tendency to move too far, too fast. We have a little bit of success and then we think we're done. And then we have a really bad experience and everybody gets discouraged. And we have to start. It's not starting back at square one. It's starting back at -1, because now everybody feels demoralized and tired and then we have to start all over again. So like Allie said, go at the pace of the least comfortable individual in the process. If you have not had any education about working with aggressive dogs, if you're listening to this episode and you're like, oh my God, that sounds awesome, I'm going to do that, please don't. Pet Harmony is not telling you to go out and work with aggressive dogs now just because we made this episode. Please get a mentor to teach you how to do it well, and then you can work aggression cases.
For real. Because protected contact is not necessarily going to stop you from being bitten. The only time that I have been bitten working on a client case, I have to make all of those qualifiers to make that statement true. The only time I've been bitten on a client case was a dog who we thought the crate was fully closed, and the dog was in a crate in another room on the opposite side of the house, and she busted out of her crate, got her little nose through the door that was mostly closed but partially open, ran out and bit me. So yes, safety is a thing. All right, y'all. So today we talked about protected contact. We love it. We use it all the time. It's fantastic. We talked about free contact, partial or semi-protected, and just regular old protected contact. Not full contact, because that's football, but there should be a better word for protected contact. That's full contact. We love it because it typically gives animals the most freedom while keeping everybody safe, and also prevents humans from falling back on muscle memory that gets in the way of the training. The way that we can implement this is to first create our plan, assess what type of contact makes the most sense for the pet, for the human, in the environment, in the context, for the goal. We're then going to teach that animal to feel comfortable and happy in that space and in that situation, and give the humans the skills to be able to make that sustainable as well. From there, we can then create opportunities for safe interaction across the barrier, and finally stair-step down to partial contact and maybe even free contact if that is our goal. But moving slowly, because humans move too fast. Just in general, humans move too fast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if there's someone in your life who also needs to hear this, be sure to text it to them right now. If you're a pet parent looking for more tips on enrichment, behavior modification, and finding harmony with your pet, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Pet Harmony Training. If you're a behavior training professional dedicated to enrichment for yourself, your clients, and their pets, check us out on TikTok and Instagram at Pet Harmony Pro. As always, links to everything we discussed in this episode are in the show notes. Thank you to Ellen Yoakum for editing this episode and making us sound good. Our intro music is from Penguin Music on Pixabay. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps more pet lovers and professionals find us so they can bring enrichment into their world too. Thank you for listening, and here's to harmony. Here's a little bonus enrichment tip to thank you for listening to this episode. When you need to confine an animal in a space, make that space as enriching as possible. Use activities that you already know that your pet enjoys rather than trying to teach them a new game in a new context. Better yet, see if you can check a box on all 14 enrichment categories in that space.